Good morning. This is Ron. It is Friday, March the 30th. Welcome to Story Time. And so this is going to be Storytime Extra, and more of a critique about the mistakes of right-wing talk radio, and specifically as it applies to police officer shootings. Because there was another police officer shooting in Sacramento, California, and so in protests and whatnot. And I keep hearing from various pundits on the radio basically the same thing as whether it was Michael Brown. The only person where they didn't say that the victim deserved it, basically, was the man in South Carolina. I forget what his name was, but the one that was murdered by a police officer, and the police officer ended up going on trial and pled guilty to violating the man's civil rights. But in all other cases, Michael Brown and the gentleman in Minnesota that was shot, basically, most of the right wing conservatives, so called conservatives, say, well, he wouldn't have got shot if he'd done what he was told. Well, the last time I looked, there was no such thing as the death penalty for failing to obey the lawful orders of a police officer. You're subject to arrest and potential prosecution, but the Constitution guarantees that everybody, all citizens, and for that matter, non-citizens, are guaranteed not to have to forfeit their lives or property without due process of law. And again, we have another situation where a man had to forfeit his life without due process of law. The police officers said they thought they saw a gun. It turned out to be a cell phone, and that's a problem. You can't tell the difference between a cell phone and a gun. Wasn't there enough light? And if there wasn't, why didn't you put more light on the situation before you started shooting? The other problem with this one in Sacramento is 20 shots were fired, and that's very often the case. Is where it seems it's excessive. The police officers get carried away, and I think that it was not just one police officer firing 20 rounds, but several police officers firing 3, 4, or 5 rounds. Why was that necessary? And I'm willing to bet that it was really what compelled the other officers to go ahead and start shooting was union solidarity. They're in a union, and if their union brothers start shooting, well, damn it, I don't know if I see a weapon or not, but I'm going to start shooting just to show solidarity with my union brothers. And again, costing somebody their life. But the critique of, excuse me, of conservative talk radio of Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh goes a little bit deeper than that, because they will, while they're saying that basically these men that were shot by police officers basically deserved to die because they didn't obey police orders, and then also paint these individuals out to be cartoon characters, two-dimensional. The guy in Sacramento was a criminal. That's basically all you know about him. You don't know if he had any family. You don't know if he had any hobbies. You don't know anything about him as a fully developed human being that the right will make sure they do for the police department. So if a police officer is killed in the line of duty, we get to know whether or not that police officer was married, whether or not that police officer, how long they were on the job, what kind of hobbies that the police officer had, what his policing style. They fully develop his whole character and give the audience an idea of exactly who this person was. But but as far as if it's a civilian victim, then it doesn't happen. It's always they're painted out to be very two-dimensional. They're just, in the case of Michael Brown, he was a thug who disobeyed police orders and apparently deserved to lose his life. Now, shortly after that, at the same time, basically, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity et al. Are asking the question, Why aren't more Hispanics joining the Republican Party? Why aren't more blacks joining the Republican Party and voting Republican? They're generally mystified. They don't understand. Why is that? And so when you look at the situation, the disparity between the way the victims of police crime shootings are treated versus the police officers themselves, it's if I was black, I wouldn't want to be a member of the Republican Party either. I wouldn't want anything to do with it if that's the way you're going to do things. The other question to me is, look at this: when a police officer is shot, the funeral is attended by thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. Police officers from all over the country very often come in and attend the funeral. So my question is, how many police officers attended the funeral of Michael Brown, of the individual, the guy in Sacramento that was just killed, the guy in Minnesota, even the guy in South Carolina, where you could see on the tape that it was a blatant murder. He was just being murdered, flat out, cold-blooded murder. How many police officers showed up to that funeral? Okay, none, zero. How many conservative pundits went to those funerals? None. So, and how many, also with the South Carolina situation, how many union members, police officer union members, stood up and decried that shooting and said that was horrible and despicable and that the officer should be immediately prosecuted? None that I remember. None. But if you criticize the police departments, if you come out like Quentin Tarantino did at a particular rally and sharply criticize the police department, oh boy, you'll hear from the police unions who then suggest an immediate boycott of Tarantino's films. But for the victims, screw them. Apparently, the police officers or the police unions just don't care. And again, so if how can you as you're Sean Hannity and you're asking, gee, how come more blacks don't join the Republican Party? Really? You can't figure it out? It also applies to Hispanics. Look at the situation with regards to Hispanics, and again, how illegal alien Hispanics are treated in by Republican pundits as though any negative thing or bad thing that happens to them, they earned or deserved because they are because they're illegal aliens. Also, they're referred to as in cartoonish ways. They're not, again, fully developed characters, people, human beings. They're not portrayed that way as a human being. Also, when an illegal alien, yes, they're here illegally. No, they shouldn't be here illegally. Perhaps they should be deported, but that doesn't mean that they should be exploited, that they should be cheated out of what is rightfully theirs, their wages, etc. And when they find themselves in that position that they're getting cheated, it is the ACLU and other left-wing law firms that come to help them out. No conservative law firms will bother to try to stand up for illegal aliens. Yet, the lawyers in those law firms will be the first ones to say that this is a country or a nation of laws and that we have to respect the rule of law. Well, they should try proving it. Go out and don't allow just the ACLU to go out and take these cases. Take them yourself. Conservative law firms should be out there taking these cases for these illegal aliens and getting them a measure of justice. But again, so you have this situation with the conservatives, whether it's the law firms or the pundits, that are, again, treating Hispanics in a rather shabby way. Yes, they're illegal. No, they shouldn't be here. But that doesn't mean that they should be treated like they're cartoon characters. And yet the right-wing conservative talk show hosts treat them exactly that way, and then have the chutzpah, the utter gall, to scratch their heads and say, gee, I don't understand why more Hispanics aren't Republicans, aren't conservatives, don't listen to the show, or whatever. Gee, really? You can't figure it out. And perhaps one of these days, Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh will be able to figure out why it is that more blacks and more Hispanics. Because again, if I was a Hispanic and I was a Republican, I'd be a black, I'd be very, very reluctant to join the Republican Party, given the way that blacks and Hispanics are treated. Yes, on the margins, but still being treated rather poorly. Again, being described in a cartoonish ways, treated not as real human beings, as real citizens. And in the case of illegal aliens, of course, they're not citizens. But in the terms of blacks, then they're real citizens. And that's what the conservatives should be doing. They should treat these individuals with some modicum of respect as a human being, and in the case of citizens, as citizens. They should, if they can do it, go to the funeral, the services, pay their respects. Also, talk about these people as though they are real people, real human beings. Describe them fully. What were their hobbies? To give them the same treatment, give the illegal aliens, the blacks, the same treatment you would give the police officers. Okay, describe them fully. Who were these people? Did they have hobbies? Did they have wives and children, or girlfriends, or boyfriends, or whatever the case may be? And also, they've got to remember that there is no death penalty for violating or refusing to or follow the orders of a police officer, or just failing to. In the case of the guy in Minnesota, I mean, that was so egregious, I can't believe it that he got away with that. It was, if you or I had pulled the stunt that any of these police officers had done, if we had gone with Mr. Brown in Missouri, and he lowered his head and was going to charge at us, and we shot him dead, we'd be spending the rest of our lives in prison. There's no doubt about that. And if what happened in Minnesota, you pull a gun on the guy and he goes for his permit or something, and I shot him 5 times and kill him, I'm going to end up in prison for the rest of my life, as I should, as anybody should, including police officers. And that's part of the problem with police officer unions, is that they have enough power to get the laws changed, skewed, so that they become, in effect, super citizens. They don't have to follow the same laws that you and I do, and they should be made to do so. There's no excuse for it. The current rationalization for it is, well, they're doing a dangerous job. They're doing no more of a dangerous job than anybody in the United States military. Okay, and arguably less dangerous, because they don't have to go out and deal with improvised explosive devices and other such things. So, and if the people in the military have to obey those laws, if it was a military member that had shot down Michael Brown, he'd be in prison for the rest of his life. If a military member had shot down that gentleman in Minnesota, again, he'd be in jail or prison for the rest of his life. There'd be no such thing as, and probably lose his job and probably get sued on top of it. And right now, the only justice that anybody can get is via the courts, and usually they can't even get that, because it never goes to trial. It's always settled. And I'd love to see a situation where we get a jury verdict on a civil case. The city, the county, the police department are sued. It goes to a jury, and get the jury to come out and say, this was absolutely egregious. It was outrageous. It never should have occurred. It never should have happened. And say that they're liable to actually hear that from a jury, that the police department is liable for somebody's death. And I was going to say, as far as the unions are concerned too, is one of the reasons police officers are as aggressive as they are is, again, because of the union mentality. The union instructs the officers not that their main job every day is to go out and enforce the law and to serve the public, but their main job every day is to make sure they come home to their family. That's what they're told. So every police officer that's going out on the beat has a kill or be killed kind of mentality to them. And it's not hard to see if you compare, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, police officers didn't pull their gun except to go to the range and qualify. They spend 20, 30 years without ever drawing their weapon. Now police officers are doing it every day. Traffic stop and they're pulling their weapon. They're aggressive. And again, it's because the unions train them to be aggressive. Train them that the most important thing here is that you go home to your wife and kids, so that means you don't take any chances. If you even think you see a weapon, you start opening fire. No, that's got to stop. That's absolutely got to change. It's got to stop. And most of all is if the people in the Republican Party want to see the party become big tent, they got to change their attitude. They got to take a good critical look at the way they're approaching police officer shooting situations and change their attitude about it and start treating the victims, the true victims of these shootings, these crimes, as far as I'm concerned, with more compassion and with some more human decency. So tomorrow I'm going to be on chapter 13 of Ayn Rand's philosophy, Who Needs It? And so until then, thank you very much for joining me and have a great day.